I work for the University of Maryland Extension here in Queen Anne's County. I'm the county ag agent, lifelong resident, so I want to give you an official welcome to Queen Anne's County. We get to talk about in this next section something that is near and dear to my heart, and that's agriculture. I'm also a farm owner. I'm a poultry producer, and we have a grain, with my sons, we have a grain operation. So my day is full every day of agriculture. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all three of our speakers, and then I'll let them come up one by one. So first, well, I'll start backwards. Judy Denver will be one of our speakers. She's a hydrologist with the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Water Science Center for the U.S. Geological Survey. She's located in Delaware. She has over 35 years' experience. Much of her work is focused on understanding the effects of agricultural practices in water chemistry and the transport of nutrients into groundwater and through groundwater into surface waters, and working a lot in coastal plains. Her background education, she has a BS in geology and an MS in marine studies, and she's going to talk to us about groundwater trends. It's a fabulous talk. I've heard her give that several times. Then Rebecca Fox is assistant professor at the Environmental Science of Studies in Washington College. She earned her PhD in 2011 from the University of Maryland Center of Environmental Science at Horn Point. Her current research is focusing on investigating whether widespread use of best management practices, BMPs, can in fact increase water quality in small agriculture-dominated watersheds in the Choptank Basin. So she's going to talk about these testings of the BMP efficiencies in 3 different watersheds. Our first speaker this afternoon is going to be Dr. Stephanie Lansing. She's an assistant professor at the University of Maryland, Department of Environment, Science, and Technology, and she works with several other academic affiliations. She earned her MS and PhD in Food, Agriculture, and Biological Science from the University, from the Ohio State University, and her BS in Environmental Science from the University of Oklahoma. Her research is very fascinating. It includes anaerobic digestion, microbial fuel cells, and the list goes on and on. She's worked all around the world. She teaches several classes on campus. So she's going to talk to us about one of my favorite subjects is manure. And it's going to be, she's going to talk about manure to energy. I have to tell you, my grandsons will say, "Oh, Mama, that manure, it just doesn't smell good." I said, "Grandsons, that manure is money. Remember that."
Thank you, Jennifer. All right. So as you're digesting your food, I will talk a little bit about just bioenergy and digestion gasification and other kind of manure technologies, and specifically how those might relate to nutrient removal. So when we look at bioenergy, so there's several different types of ways we can get energy from biological sources, from carbon chains, basically. So you have the thermochemical processes, just burning it. You can get heat from that. Gasification, when we do gasification, again, we're burning it, but we're burning it at a lower oxygen concentration and a higher temperature. So instead of just getting heat coming off, you actually get syngas. And then you can use that syngas and use that for electricity generation, okay? Then you have pyrolysis, which is again at a higher temperature, a lower oxygen content, and again, you can use that for electricity generation. And so you have these things where you basically are just burning it. You're taking those carbon chains like you would for coal or natural gas, and you're basically burning it, and you're using that energy you're using the energy from the combustion process to create electricity. So that's for the gasification, and then we go to our biochemical conversions. And so this is where anaerobic digestion comes in and ethanol comes in. So this is where we're actually using bugs, okay? So for anaerobic digestion, we're basically breaking down substances with microorganisms. A byproduct of their metabolism is methane. And then that methane can be used just like natural gas. Natural gas is 97 to 99% methane. So what we're doing is basically creating methane, and so then that can be used in a generator for electricity production, or can be used directly for heating. And then with ethanol, what we're doing is we're again using those microbes, but these microbes actually, they're creating an alcohol, which is ethanol, that then can be used as a liquid fuel. So you're basically replacing petroleum. And then finally you have extraction using basically biodiesel. And this is where we're basically pressing out the oils. We're adding methanol to it so that we make it so that it's used to be in a fuel in a diesel fuel engine. Okay, so that's an extraction process. So those are basically all of the different bioenergy options that we have. The ones specifically that we're going to talk about are basically anaerobic digestion and gasification. Those are two that we use here on the Bay that they're seeing as options as manure technologies. So when we talk about anaerobic digestion, we'll start there. So basically, you can put anything into a digester that you can think about anything that has carbon that can be broken down. So it's basically, our stomachs are basically big digesters, right? We have microbes in our stomach. They break down the food that we put in, and some of us produce more methane gas than others. But we have methanogens in our gut. And so what we're doing is we're basically creating another source here where we're actually optimizing for these methanogens so that we get a lot more methane production. So we can put manure in here. We can put energy crops. We can put wastewater sludge. Again, the DC wastewater treatment plant, so PG County, Montgomery County, and DC, all go to the DC Water, Blue Plains Wastewater Treatment Plant. They now have a new huge digester that they're using to actually produce electricity that is then being, actually they're not even selling it back to the grid. They're the #1 user of electricity, so they're just using it to run their own operation. But again, anything can come in here, any organics. And then there's a series of steps that happen. It's just microorganisms that break down. So you can think about it, you put a piece of broccoli on the table. When you come back a week later, that broccoli, if you go on vacation, you come back, it's like a liquid mess, right? Well, that's what's happening inside the digester. The microbes are breaking it down. And then the final step of this process is the methanogenesis, where you have the methanogens basically take the byproducts of all this metabolism, and then they produce a methane byproduct. So you get biogas. Biogas is mainly methane, but this isn't natural gas. It's got some other stuff in it too. It's about 60 to 70% methane. The rest of it is being CO2, hydrogen sulfide, and other things. So people often say, well, there's CO2 there, so isn't that increasing greenhouse gases? Well, that CO2 is the corn that the cow ate, right? So the CO2 was sequestered by the corn. The cow ate it, and then it's re-released, okay? The difference is by putting it into a digester, you get the methane, which then you can use for energy. And so instead of using fossil fuels for electricity or other energy sources. And then what comes out is a liquid fertilizer. So you see that we have 25 to 80% less solids. We're really good at breaking down the substance there. We're good at breaking down the solids. Again, your broccoli goes from a piece of broccoli to like a liquefied mess, right? But in that carbon that's there goes up to CH4, the methane. What we're not really removing is nutrients. We're taking the nutrients from an organically bound form in this matrix, right? The manure matrix, the poultry litter matrix, the wastewater sludge, the food, the crops that you can put in. You're taking the nutrients from that matrix and you're basically liquefying it. So then you have a liquid fertilizer that then you can use, okay? Or you can further treat. We'll talk about that. But you're only reducing the nutrients are basically being reduced only through the microbial uptake. So you're talking about within the digester, 5 to 20% removal of nutrients. It's not really going to remove a lot of your nutrients, but it's going to change it from organically bound from that solid form to a liquid form. So again, we have all of these different substances we can put into our digester, our energy crops, our manure, our food waste, and they're going into your biogas plant, okay? From here, we scrub out the H2S. The H2S basically corrodes our engines. So we scrub out the H2S, and then we can put it in a gas boiler just for heating. We have some breweries that are actually doing this, where they're taking their brewery waste, they're putting it there, and then they're using it back to heat up their tanks to brew their beer with, right? So you can use it directly for heat. You can put it into a generator and create electricity from it, and then that electricity can then be used on farm or sold back to the grid. Or you can actually scrub out the CO2 and you can actually put it in a vehicle. And you see a lot more of this in Europe. In Germany, they have basically their natural gas vehicles, but they run off of biogas instead of natural gas. So there's many different ways that you can do with it. Basically, again, anything you can do with natural gas, you can do with biogas. Make electricity, use it directly, have a natural gas vehicle. So if we look at US digesters, so we're right here, this is a logarithmic scale. We're at 1,700 digesters, the majority of those being at wastewater treatment plants. About 1,500 wastewater treatment plants, which seems like a lot, but it's actually still a less than a third of the wastewater treatment plants in the US have digesters. But we have quite a few at wastewater treatment plants. We have 260 on farm. This is compared to Germany, which has 7,500 digesters on farm. So Germany has a third of our dairy cells, a third of our animal production, and yet they have, 260 to 7,500 digesters. And so a lot of this goes back to policy. And then you have Nepal, India, and China, and yes, that is 40 million digesters. And a lot of these are very small scale digesters that they do as part of their rural energy to get energy out to the rural areas. And so they have these very small digesters that are scattered throughout the countrysides. So again, I alluded to DC water as well. So this is just to understand, again, this isn't for agriculture, but this is, again, wastewater treatment plants. So what we do is we settle out the solids. The solids that settle out from the wastewater treatment plant, you send into the digester. DC, again, 3% of all electricity use in the country is used to treat our own wastewater. Okay, it's a very highly intensive electricity user. So what you do is you basically take those solids, and now we're utilizing those solids to produce electricity. And so what DC is doing, again, they have 30 million gallons of wastewater per day. And what they have is they have a thermal hydrolysis where they basically pressure cook it before it goes to the digester. So they kind of break down, they make that broccoli liquefaction process happen a lot quicker. Okay, and then it goes into the digester. And then from the digester, they digest it, they get the biogas, they use it to run generators, they use it to run their plant, and then the liquids actually go back to the front of the wastewater treatment plant because we still need to get rid of the nitrogen and phosphorus, right? And then the solids then are now Class A biosolids. They can sell them now in Home Depot, right? Because these are now pathogen-free, we've reduced the pathogens, and we actually have a really good compost product that can be put in. One of the things they're looking at doing here is actually adding food waste. The idea is we want to get the food waste away from the landfills. So if we put food waste in here, if you think about the waste that comes out of our bodies, manure out of the cow's body, that's already been digested a little bit, right, in our stomachs. And so it has a much lower energy potential than actually putting the food waste itself into the digester. You can have 10 times more energy from the food waste, from the food, than you would from the excrements. So again, the idea is that they're expecting to produce 13 megawatts of electricity, which is enough to power 8,000 homes, still not enough to run the wastewater treatment plant though. But it'll save a lot in the trucking costs and reducing their emissions because again, their solids are being digested. So right now what they're doing is they're taking these solids that come from the wastewater treatment plant and they're putting them out on the ag fields as fertilizer. So they're still gonna have some of that happen, but they're gonna have a lot less of that because they're digesting it and using it for electricity instead. And what they are gonna have are now gonna be Class A instead of Class B biosolids. Okay, so why do we have only 264 digesters in the United States? One of it has to do with economy of scale. We have almost all of our digesters are on very large farms. But here, we only have 4 digesters that are on farms with 200 cows or less. But in the US, it's really interesting. So the majority of our farms are small farms, but the majority of our cows are on big farms. Okay, so what that is we have a lot of small farms, but then we have a lot of really big farms. And so you have 1,000 cow farms. And those are the ones where digesters are financially viable in the sense that you can build the digester, you get a lot of electricity in one place. And so that's where most of our digesters have been built. In Germany, again, they get a much higher rate for their electricity prices. So if you have a farm digester, you're guaranteed 20 cents a kilowatt hour. 17 cents a kilowatt hour for the electricity coming from that digester. And so they have a lot of community digesters. They actually bring the waste in, they digest it, and then the fertilizer goes back out to the fields. So what we've done is we've been at the university, we've been doing work on kind of these smaller scale digesters. So if there's 40 million in China, there's 260 in the US. Is there something we can do to try to make it so that it's more financially viable for those small scale farmers to have digesters? So we're looking at different temperature regimes, we're looking at different designs to try to concentrate on bringing this technology to more farmers. Another thing that we've been doing is this is actually a farm in Cecil County, Maryland. So Kilby Farmery, I don't know if you've ever had Kilby Creamery ice cream. It is fantastic, you should. But he actually has a digester on his farm. So this is a really interesting case in kind of sustainability. So he built this digester. It's a covered lagoon digester. He built it himself. He had a lagoon. He basically put a cover on it. And now they have a generator, so the gas comes up the top. Again, it reduced odors because those odors come up with the gas. But as soon as you put it in the generator, those odors are combusted. You can think of it like when you cook with natural gas, they add odor to natural gas. And so that we know if it's not lit right, so that we can smell it, right? But as soon as you light your natural gas stove, you don't smell it anymore. The same thing happens with a digester. So you cover it up, and now that the odors go up with the gas, they're captured, and then you combust it in the generator, and you no longer have those odors. So he says the best thing about this digester is his neighbors like him, And then the effluent that comes off that he puts on his field also is it doesn't have any odor because all of those aromatics, the sulfides and everything, have gone up into the biogas. So what he's done is he built this digester. But then to make it financially viable, because he had to get a loan to build the digester, he's bringing food waste in from New Jersey. So sustainability, I don't know, but why is he doing that? He's doing that because this is a meatball factory, so it's making some some Italian meatball frozen dish thing that goes to Walmart, okay? It's a chicken marmalade factory, and it's a cranberry factory. All of them are going to Walmart. And what Walmart does is Walmart gives you a sustainability index. And if you have more points on their sustainability index, you become a preferred seller to Walmart. So these factories in New Jersey are basically increasing their sustainability points, becoming preferred buyers for Walmart by trucking their waste. Instead of it going to the landfill or the wastewater treatment plant, they're trucking it to this farm digester, recycling their food onto the nutrients, now go onto the fields, and they're creating energy from it. So they got a big bump in their sustainability index. Yes, they're trucking it from New Jersey, but the waste is being dealt with sustainably. And so they're actually paying him. So the loan he took out for his digester is being paid every month from the tipping fees he gets from these factories. And he's also producing electricity. His right now, the electricity is only used on his farm. Again, he has an ice cream factory on his farm as well as the milking parlor. But he estimates he saves about $120,000 a year in electricity costs from having this digester there. And again, this is just showing, these are some of the studies we've done, but again, here's the manure and how much methane you're getting from just the manure. And this is how much methane we're getting from the food waste. So again, the food waste increases his methane production, plus he gets paid for it. So we have some poultry litter digesters as well, and this is really important again for the bay. People are looking at, can we do poultry litter digestion? Can this solve our nutrient management issues? And so we have one. We have a digester it's built, up and running in the next month is what I'm told. And so this is a poultry litter digester. Why poultry litter is different is because manure is liquidy. It comes in, dairy manure, wastewater, it comes in, it's very liquidy. Poultry manure is very dry, okay? So we're actually adding water to the poultry litter. So you're taking something that's pretty easy to transport, it's poultry litter, but you might need to transport it. You're adding a little bit of water to it, okay? Then you're digesting it. What happens is we want to use that water when we're done, we can solid separate it out, and the water we want to put back to the front of the digester, so we're not always using more water. But again, we talked about that ammonia level being really high because there's a lot of nitrogen in the poultry litter. So we don't want to keep getting the ammonia level higher and higher by recirculating. So what we're doing with this digester is we're adding water at the beginning of the process, digesting it, and then we're actually doing a struvite extraction. We're actually extracting out the nitrogen phosphorus from the poultry litter matrix, and we have a small product that then is much easier to transport. It's much easier to use and to take off the shore than taking all the poultry litter. We're basically breaking down the solids in the digester and then creating a sellable nitrogen phosphorus product that can then be utilized as needed. And then the water goes back to the front of the digester and it keeps going. So again, it's complicated. It's not as easy as a dairy digester. If you don't do that nutrient extraction process, again, you've taken something from a poultry litter matrix and you've liquefied it. Is that better or not? You have some nutrient removal. But now maybe we can take some of that and we can put it through a treatment wetland. We can do algal turf scrubbers. We can do manure injection into the land, which you can inject. It's really hard. You can do some poultry litter, but it's really hard to get the poultry litter injected properly versus if you have this, you can irrigate. You can do things that you couldn't do if you didn't have the digester, but really we're talking about transforming forms, not necessarily complete removal. Okay? So again, and that just says that. So we're doing, again, the scrubbing of the effluent, and so the nutrient product is there. So again, watershed implications of digestions. So again, if we look at excessive manure in the soil, one of the things that you can do with digesters is we do solid separate at the end of the digestion process, and those phosphorus tends to stay with the solid particles. And then we often use the solids back in as bedding instead of putting sand or other things for the dairy farmers. Instead of bringing something off farm in for bedding, you can actually use the solids. And then when you're done, you put it back into the digester, it digests again, and it keeps going. And so that's actually taking away expense from the farmer, and it keeps some of the phosphorus cycled within the digester unit. But again, that's only a part of it. A lot of the phosphorus is still going to be in the liquid, and that liquid is still going to be applied in the fields just like you would if you didn't have a digester. Again, the challenges is, understanding the dairy industry, the poultry industry, the economic pressures that they have, and the infancy of the poultry litter digesters. There's 3 of them in the U.S. So is this our solution? There's only 3. We don't really know. The importance of scrubbing the H2S from the biogas so you don't have your generators going down, because that's your money maker to actually pay for treatment. Most treatment options don't have a payback period. Right? We're paying for wastewater treatment plant. We're not getting money back from it. Here we get money back from it, but only if your generator's working. Depending on electricity prices, again, you have to do a purchase power agreement with the electricity company. That's a difficult thing to do, especially for a smaller farmer, to go through that process and try to get a purchase power agreement. And then, which is, again, financing and operating it as well. So again, if the opportunities are, we do have a lot of opportunities in terms of reducing greenhouse gases. And again, Germany's already doing it, and we have a lot of viable sites that we can do it, 11,000 viable sites that they said we could do right now in terms of digestion. For gasification, again, we talked a little bit about incineration pyrolysis and gasification. And there are some gasifiers that are using basically wood waste. And they're using those wood waste and they're producing electricity from it. We have one that is actually poultry litter, and we're using poultry litter and producing electricity from it. Again, that's taking that matrix. We're combusting it. We're left with a little bit of biochar, but we've basically combusted a lot of it. But that nitrogen, what we're looking at is how much of that nitrogen is then going up into the gas and possibly being emitted, and how much of, and then the phosphorus again is going to stay in the biochar that's left over. So we're looking at that. But again, for all of these, we're looking at emissions of bio-based electricity. All of these emissions are going to be much less than what we're looking at in terms of for combustion, digestion, gasification, than what you would be getting for fossil fuels. So again, we're reducing CO2 by having electricity through these systems, but there is still some life cycle costs associated with them. And so this is some of the projects that we have, and we'll go on to the next speaker and questions later. Thank you very much.
I hope you guys can all hear me in the back. I'm going to talk today about one of our projects out of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Sciences Horn Point Laboratory. I'm Rebecca Fox. I'm out of Washington College during the school year and out of Horn Point during the summer. So I'm going to talk to you about our current project going on. Basically, we're looking to test the efficiency of best management practices in three agricultural, or at least agriculturally dominated watersheds in Caroline County on the eastern shore of Maryland. Our funding comes from the National Science Foundation, and we're 2.5 years into a 5-year project. So we still have another 2.5 years to go. 5 years is pretty unusual for a project. And if you see this logo, if you happen to be in Caroline County, that's one of our farms that we're working on. So this project takes place in the chop tank. I actually assumed everybody was going to be talking about the Eastern Shore for some reason. And so we're on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. You can see us up here. This is us if you blow it up. And we're testing water quality in these 4 small areas here. So we actually have 3 experimental watersheds and 1 control watershed. First, I'm going to go over kind of the motivation behind this project, and we're going to look at some data from the Greensboro watershed. It's the USGS monitoring station. And then we're going to move downstream and look at what's actually happening in the chop tank itself. So we always show this figure whenever we give talks. And so the real motivation behind this and behind what we're all talking about really today is the fact that in our local streams and rivers and estuaries, we're seeing increases in nutrients and sediments. So if you look on this top panel, we have total nitrogen in micromolar, so you have total nitrogen in red and nitrate in blue. We start in about 1963 and go to present time. And what you can basically see is that we have huge increases in the amount of nitrogen in our streams. So this is specifically in Greensboro. If we look at phosphorus, you see the same thing. So we basically have these really large increases in nitrogen and phosphorus draining from our watersheds. If we move downstream, we can basically see that the estuary actually responds to this. So this is a shorter time series starting in about 1984 and going to present time. In the top panel, we have chlorophyll A. And what you can see is that we've had increasing annual amounts of chlorophyll A in the chop tank. So over time, basically, the waters have got greener. We've also seen lower levels of dissolved oxygen in our bottom waters in the summer. And this is a result of that algae dying and falling to the bottom and decomposing and sucking up that oxygen. And last, we also see a difference in transparency and clarity of the water. So we basically have less clear water. So all of this enhanced nutrient transport from the upper watershed and from the whole watershed in general, it's not just Greensboro, is actually resulting in greener water with more algae, less oxygen in the summer, and lower visibility in the actual river. So this is really detrimental to lots of things we all care about, mostly crabs and oysters. So this was really the motivation behind our actual project. So we've often given talks like this or to different groups and have said at the end, we think this is what you should do. And so what we decided at the end of when we wrote this proposal was we'd actually test if what we're telling people to do actually works. So we wrote this proposal to the National Science Foundation, and we basically wanted to test whether if we applied lots of best management practices, both agricultural and residential, to these small watersheds, do we in fact pick up an increase in water quality? So hopefully what we're going to find in the next 5 years, or 2.5 until our research project's done, is that we actually see increases in water quality in terms of lower nitrate and phosphate and total nitrogen and total phosphorus and sediment in our actual streams. So we took a slightly different approach to this. So we were funded through NSF's SEAS program, which is science, I think it's science, education, and engineering for sustainability. And so one of the requirements for getting funded was that you had to include some sort of social science. So we actually did include both economics and sociology in this project. So we're including the economic component. So we realized that a sustainable solution doesn't just involve the environmental solution. So I think from an environmental scientist perspective, sometimes we forget this. But it also has to be actually sustainable economically for the farmer. It also has to be socially sustainable. And so we actually have a sociologist who's looking at what the impediments are to actually applying BMPs. So we know from an environmental perspective that at the field scale they work, so why aren't they being applied everywhere? So we're doing some surveys to kind of figure this out. And last, the part, at least I tend to think about more with sustainability is this actually increasing water quality? So if we can actually find a balance to this, then we can have truly sustainable watersheds. And so this, you'll often see this if you do anything with sustainability. The 3 pillars of sustainability are economics, social, and environmental. So we're looking for that balance. So just as a reminder where we are, we're up in the Upper Choptank. We're in Caroline County. We chose these watersheds based on the fact that they were all similar in size, they have similar soil types, and they also, well, basically, they're all in Caroline County, and we have our local agricultural extension agent on the project, and he knows everyone, so that helped. And so we're actually monitoring at the base of each watershed. So we've actually been monitoring at the base of each of these watersheds for the past 13 years. So we have a really long time series of what's happening in these watersheds, so that when we start to actually apply best management practices, we should, if there is a change, we have enough data to actually pick up a change. So we didn't just start monitoring these at the start of the project, we actually have been monitoring them for a very long time. We also realized that one of the criticisms with applying best management practices to a whole watershed and then looking for actual differences at the outlet is that groundwater moves really slowly, which I'm sure Judy will talk about in a second. And so maybe we actually won't pick up changes at the watershed outlet in this time period. So in order to address this, we're actually sampling throughout the watershed at what we're calling mesoscale sites. So they're it's kind of subdividing the watershed into smaller watersheds. And then, just in case we don't pick it up there either, we're actually sampling on the farm. So we have a number of great farmers involved in this project. So we're basically sampling all around the watershed. And we're sampling monthly at all of these scales, and we're testing for changes in nitrogen, phosphorus, sediments, and we're also monitoring gases in groundwater. So it'll give us an idea of what actual biological processes are going on for us to actually see these changes. So, as I said, we have very long-term data sets for this project. And so we have very variable concentrations. So this is the actual outlet data. You can see, so Greensboro, which was the data I showed you earlier. And then we have Old Town, South Forge, and Spring, which are our experimental watersheds, and Broadway's our control. And so the pluses or minuses are basically whether over this long time series that we have, this 13 years, if we're seeing an increase in nitrogen or phosphorus, a decrease, or no change at all. And what you can basically see is we do have a couple that are decreasing in concentration, but the large majority are either increasing in nitrogen or phosphorus or staying about the same. So it basically, we could talk about the actual data itself, but what we want this for is just to test if we can pick up a change over time. So thanks to Bill and Ian, you can get a nice conceptual diagram. And so there's lots of nitrogen and phosphorus sources in watersheds. Our project is actually dealing with farm and residential. However, if you look at the actual land use in our watersheds, most of it is agricultural. So I'm actually only going to talk about agriculture today. However, we do realize that residents can be a source. And part of the reason that we're really focusing on ag is not only that most of it is agriculture in these watersheds, but we've had a really hard time getting residents to work with us. So if anybody has any great ideas on how to actually get residents to talk to us or work with us, we would love to hear it. So we are going to just purely talk about agriculture today. Okay, so part of our social science part of this was doing surveys and figuring out what actual initial impediments were. So why don't we actually have BMPs everywhere? So I should tell you first, we do have a lot of BMPs already on the ground in these watersheds because they're really pretty progressive and amazing farmers. So we have a lot of BMPs in place anyway. So we're looking to increase past what's already on the ground. So one of the actual first impediments we have is that you can get help to put these BMPs on the ground, either through MDA, through the MAX program, or through EQIP, through incentive payments. But this still requires often the farmer to actually pay something. So we know this is part of a limitation. So we actually got a project funded with Mitchell Riverkeepers to basically pay for that last little bit. So we completely take that financial impediment away. We also know that it's kind of a bit of a pain in the butt to fill out the paperwork. So we've been trying to kind of enhance the connection between our farmers and through the NRCS and MDA people. And last, it's not just about putting BMPs in place, but there's also structural, well, a lot of the structural ones actually require maintenance. So part of the problem with putting them in could be that you actually have to maintain that BMP for a while. So to try to, I guess it doesn't really overcome the impediment, but to show that it actually works, part of what we're doing is we're really trying to communicate well with the farmers, show them that we are monitoring that and showing them the data. So you can actually see that, yes, it does make a difference, or no, it doesn't, because we might find in certain circumstances that the BMP isn't actually doing what we expect it to do. And that's part of the reason we got funded, was maybe it's not doing what we think it's going to do. So I'm just going to go through some of the management practices we either have on the ground or we're talking about installing this year, with some of the pros that we see to it and some of the issues that we actually have with it too, because the issues are what we have to overcome if we want to get them in the ground. So we have quite a few drainage control structures going on the ground this year. They're either going on drainage ditches like this one. So you can basically see there's a structure that goes at the end of a ditch. It kind of, it's a structure that you can put boards in and it backs the water table up. So on this side here, the water table is actually backed up. On this side, it's actually going to be draining freely. So when the ditch gets filled up enough, the water can actually come over the boards and flow away. And so the idea behind this is it induces denitrification. So denitrification is the process that reduces nitrate, which is the most labile form of nitrogen, to N2 gas. And we should lose N2 gas from the soil. You can also, through the process of denitrification, get nitrous oxide, which is a greenhouse gas, which is why we're also measuring gases. The other thing it does is actually stores water for the next year or for that coming year longer in the soil, keeps it in the rooting zone, so you actually have less of a water limitation. The major con to this is they're quite expensive. We've had some go in that have, well, in different projects that have been up to, $25K, $30K. So if you have to pay the 12.5% of this, so MDA will pay for 87.5%, but that extra 12.5% isn't, a tiny amount. It's still a decent amount of money. We've also had issues this year in actually engineering approval. So to get this cost share, you do actually have to have the plan approved. And on the Eastern Shore, we have a delay in engineering. So we have a few that are waiting to go in, and we have a farmer ready to put one in, but we're having trouble actually getting it going. We have been monitoring this for a little while. This is from a past project. So you can see the black dots are the unflooded ditch. So this is basically a ditch that we put a controlled drainage structure in halfway through. So one side was backed up and basically, hopefully, was inducing denitrification. The other side was free flowing. So the black dots are the unflooded, the free flowing side. The red dots are the flooded ditch. And the basic thing you can see is that we have much higher concentrations of nitrate in the side of the ditch that isn't backed up. So we're using this as evidence of basically we have reduction of nitrate, or at least we have lower concentrations in the flooded side of the ditch. And we did measure dissolved gases as part of this too, and we did see increased excess N2, which is indicative of denitrification. Potentially, what could have also happened was that the water got backed up and started to come around the actual ditch, the actual structure, but we still think there was some processing involved. So these basically do work. The second one we are talking about getting in on one of our farms is a wetland easement. And so wetlands also provide ideal conditions for denitrification. They also take up nutrients, and some of the pros is that it's also habitat restoration. So I'm not going to lie, I always think about nitrogen. But some people actually care about habitat too, so there's habitat restoration. And we also have potentially good hunting grounds. So you have another incentive to putting this in if you like to hunt. We've had some difficulty implementing one of these on one of our farms this year due to kind of really stringent rules for putting in forested wetlands. So, we do have some places that would be ideal for this in our opinion, but there's some stringent regulations for getting some help with this. Stream buffers. This is one of the BMPs that you probably think about a lot, right? So same thing, they're ideal for denitrification. When overland flow is happening, it can slow down overland flow, cause sediment to drop out, and they can also provide habitat. We actually have found that a number of our farmers don't necessarily have the 30-foot buffer, but have 10-foot buffers. And so even though they don't have the 30-foot set aside, they do still have some portion of their field set aside that could be reducing our actual NMP and sediment losses. Something else we've found is that a lot of our farmers who had land in CREP up through last year, actually when their rental basically finished, they didn't re-enroll because the actual cost of the grain was so much more than the actual rental rate. So it wasn't financially a good decision to keep your land in CREP. So it might be something we're thinking about is increasing the actual rental rate for CREP. We do have we had a bioreactor already go in, and we're talking about putting some more in with miniature river keepers. And so these are kind of one of the new things that people are talking about a lot now. So bioreactors, this is a bioreactor, you basically dig a hole, divert your tile line through it or your ditch through it, and it flows through an area that has lots of wood chips. So wood chips, for denitrification, you need a nitrate source, you need a carbon source, and you need the microbes and low oxygen. So this basically provides the ideal conditions for denitrification. And miniature riverkeepers have found that when it's not during a storm, you actually have huge removals of nitrate. So up to 95% of the nitrate coming in is being removed. We're also putting a few slag or gypsum traps, either in tile drains. Actually, I think all of ours are going in to the top of tile drains. And basically, the gypsum sorbs phosphorus and takes it out of solution or takes it out of the flow, so then it no longer reaches those streams. Cover crops, I think you guys all know and see cover crops everywhere. You tend to see a lot of cover crops around here, and they tend to go on after corn. We've been trying to encourage farmers to actually fly them on after soybeans. And the reason for this is that even though you don't apply fertilizer to soybeans, soybeans still basically fix nitrogen, and you can still have leakage of that nitrogen into your groundwater. So we are working to try to get some of this flown on. I think it used to be cost shared, and it no longer is. And there is actually a high rate, potential rate of failure when you do this, because so this is a conduit, if you fly it on and it takes seed before your soybean is ready to be harvested, you can have a big mess in your combine when you go to harvest. So there are some actual technical difficulties that could be worked through, but it is an area that we're not actually using cover crops for, is after soybeans. Around here, we went to a meeting a few years ago out in the Midwest, and they were talking about just split fertilizer. So applying, your normal fertilizer at planting and then doing a side dress in June, which was interesting to us because we know that a lot of farmers around here already do this. What we're actually working on with farmers is to do a split-split, so to apply some fertilizer at planting and then to do a split fertilizer in June and then a second later one. So this basically applies the nitrogen at a time when the crop is actually growing, so it kind of matches nitrogen application to the actual growth rate. And if you have a big storm after your first fertilizer application, then you don't lose quite as much either. And last, I think this is my last one, is precision ag. So precision ag is one of those things that I think is going to really revolutionize agriculture. It's cool to take advantage of the new technology that we actually do have. So basically, you can apply fertilizer at the rate at which the crop needs it. And so it senses how green the crop is, if it looks, so without going into it too much, because I don't really know, it senses how green or how yellow it is, and then if you need basically nitrogen, it applies it where it's needed. So we actually don't have a lot of farmers doing this in our watersheds. It's partially because it's an upfront cost. It costs quite a decent amount. And a lot of our farmers, like one of the past talks was saying, own small plots of land. So it's a large expense to just do for your smaller farm. So it's something that we're definitely interested in, and we do have a farmer doing this. So just to conclude all of this, we have serious water quality issues in the chop tank, as well as lots of other areas in the Chesapeake Bay. We've been pretty successful at recruiting farmers. So we have about 2/3 of the farmers in our small watersheds working with us. We have not been at all successful with residents, but with farmers, we've been very successful. We still have 1/3 that we'd like to get on board. And something we've noticed in the last year is that we've kind of hung around for long enough now that people are starting to trust us, or at least realizing we're not going anywhere. We are beginning to work with more people. One of the things or at least I must say I didn't realize was going to take so long, was to get lots of BMPs on the ground. I think we were a bit naive when we came into this project that we could very quickly enhance the number of BMPs on the ground. And it's one of those things that just takes time. It takes a lot of time to build relationships with farmers and residents. It takes time to find some additional funding. So this year we actually do have quite a number of BMPs going on the ground in our watersheds. So in the next year or two, we should be able to talk to you about the actual effects we're seeing in water quality. And although I didn't really talk about it, we do have an economic component to try to find the most cost-effective BMPs to apply within these watersheds, because we do realize that economics really drives a lot of farm management decisions. So it shouldn't be not considered, it really does need to be considered in this decision-making process. So I will take questions afterwards if you have any questions. But yeah, if anybody has any ideas on how we can maybe help recruit more residents, we would love to hear it. Thank you.
Hi, Rebecca gave me a nice introduction to some of the things I'm going to be talking about with groundwater and some of the trends we see in agricultural areas, and also a little bit about some work we're doing to actually study a few of the BMPs that are going on with respect to what they're contributing to groundwater, and a new product we have that we think will help people with, it's the very last slide, if they let me keep talking, that to help people understand maybe where different types of BMPs for agricultural purposes or anything that affects nitrate concentrations in groundwater and moving to streams would be most effective. So most of this is related, almost all the work we're doing is related to the eastern shore, because that's where we work, but a lot of the things that we're doing and a lot of the practices Rebecca said also are applicable in large parts of the Piedmont where we have thick saprolitic sediments and other parts of the Chesapeake Basin. So don't think of it just as an eastern shore talk, but how we might work in other parts of the bay too. When we talk about groundwater on the Delmarva, we're really talking about the superficial aquifer system where we have flow paths of many different lengths coming under from many different land uses. Most of our stream flow, when it's not raining, is coming from these different flow paths, and most of our streams are getting water from many different sources, many different land uses, and also water of many different ages. So I'll try to explain that a little bit. One thing we need to remember when we talk about nutrients with nitrate, which is the major nutrient that we see in streams and rivers, it's almost all from groundwater. Most of it, the vast majority is from groundwater. So when we talk about what happens on the land surface, it takes, here's 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 30 plus years maybe for the longer flow paths to get to the streams. And much of our agricultural land, our developed land, is up on the uplands where we have the longer flow paths, with the exception of the waterfront homes around here, right? But over time then, as we've starting out in the 50s and started to increase our fertilizer applications, we started seeing gradual movement of higher concentrations of nitrogen through the system to the streams. And now, in the last, I guess when I started giving this talk, it was probably 10 years, maybe 15 years now, we're starting to see a lot more of the BMPs that Rebecca just talked about. And we're anticipating that those are going to be removing some of the high levels of nitrogen or reducing them near the land surface. But we're not going to see that change for quite a while in many parts of our streams. And that's probably a large reason the chop tank is still going up. And a lot of our eastern shore streams are still going up because the average age of the water is from 20 to 30 years that's coming into the stream. So that reduction that we've seen over the last 10 is maybe only making up a third of the water coming, and then if it's not a very big reduction, we wouldn't see a very big change. So these things take time, as we know, and we've been trying to look at the shallow groundwater system to help us understand this since this is one of our first studies from the late 1980s, and this is back in the 50s when we started really after World War II increasing nitrogen inputs on the land surface, and we started seeing within our groundwater, once we were able to age date the groundwater to know how long it had been in the system, we see this increase in nitrate concentrations in groundwater. So it took a while to get there. I believe there was a talk, the first Don was talking about when he started work in the 60s, we were back here where the water from groundwater, the high concentrations really hadn't made it to the streams yet. And that's a large part of the nutrient issues that we have today, is over time that has made it to the streams in certain areas. And that's not just agriculture, but a lot of our development has happened since then. So now we have a graph. This graph is just showing from 1910 to 2010 changes in fertilizer inputs. The blue is nitrogen, the green is phosphorus, the red is just on the side, it's just millions of broilers on the eastern shore. We've had an increase, and we've done some sampling through our NAQUA program decadally since 1988. The first time we sampled, we were sampling water that was this range of ages, so it was kind of on this, we're just looking at nitrogen now in the water. It's kind of on this part where we were still seeing an increase in nitrogen in groundwater. The next time we sampled, in 2001, we were sampling more this part of the, more where it had leveled out. And the last time we sampled, I was still working for the program then. I was really excited because I thought, wow, if we're going to see change, now's the time we're going to see change, because we've started to improve our practices. We're considering, I think one of the biggest things we did was to consider on the Eastern Shore manure in our nutrient management budgets. We started to increase the amount of cover crops we put on and other practices that have helped us with nutrient management to reduce the amount maybe that we're putting on the ground and the timing that we put it on so there would be less to leach. So what happened? So this is our sampling network. It's all through the Delmarva Peninsula. It's some domestic wells and also some monitoring wells are included. These are the nitrogen concentrations by decade. This was our 1988 to 90. This is nitrate is 10 here. So you can see there was an increase, and that was between the 88 to the 2000 sampling. That was when we were on that rise in the nitrogen concentrations being applied that were represented within our water that we were sampling. And then when we, and I'll mention too that these are all samples from water that contains dissolved oxygen. We took out the samples that were already reduced because they weren't going to have nitrate in them anyway. We just wanted to see the changes in nitrate. So then we went back, and here's our 2000 sample again, where we went back in 2012, 2013, and you can see the median has decreased quite a bit, and it's a pretty statistically significant number from that data set. So we did think that we were seeing the beginnings of improvements in groundwater quality, shallow groundwater quality, and that maybe we haven't seen that making it to the streams yet. Now when they go back and sample, I don't think I'm going to be doing it in 2023 or 2025. Hopefully that will be when we really see some improvements if what we're doing is working. And if we put less on and we put it on in a more timely manner, we should be seeing improvements. We saw all those increases in the past, I think, to a large extent because we weren't thinking about how much we were putting on as much, or thinking about, we didn't know that what we were doing if we put manure on as a disposal was going to cause a problem in the future. We didn't know landfills were going to cause problems leaching. There was a lot of things we didn't know that we know now. And hopefully we'll continue to see these improvements. So I was mentioning some management practices, cover crops, including manure. You can see this little diagram just shows back in 2000, we started adding more cover crops. I can't even read this number right here. But from the Chesapeake Bay program data, we also saw work by Ken Staber and Russ Brinsfield when they started studying rye cover crops back in '88, how nitrate concentrations that were higher prior to the use of cover crops went way down. So that's probably the only study I know of that has really good definitive proof in this area of what can happen with a good cover crop. The other thing we're trying to look at now, we have a couple studies looking at irrigation as a potential BMP, because the hypothesis that if you irrigate your field, you can utilize the nutrients more effectively and take more into the crop and leave less in the field. So, and you can see that that's a pretty important thing to understand on Delmarva. Since 1950 to 2012, we're up to almost 18% of the farmland being irrigated, and I know the county I live in, Sussex County, it's 40%. And that's a pretty important thing to start to understand and to start to do as well as we can probably is irrigation management. And the new technologies, like Rebecca was mentioning, are going to be important for variable irrigation and different types of ways to deliver the water. So I just wanted to give you a real brief update on two small projects we're working on, funded by USGS, but mostly with the grain and soybean boards in Maryland, and also in Delaware with the Department of Natural Resources. We've just benefited immensely by being able to work directly with the cooperative extension folks and with the grain and soybean folks. It's just made a huge difference for us to be able to think from, like you were saying, socially from the agronomic side, as well as from the goofy nitrogen scientist side that I'm kind of used to. That's one of our sites. So the question is, are changes in ag practices, conservation practices, reducing nitrate concentration in groundwater? We're not seeing it in streams yet, so we wanted to go look at the actual shallow groundwater with the hypothesis that the irrigation is going to use the nitrogen more effectively. So we're comparing both dry land and irrigated fields, and also that cover crops planted in the late summer and fall might help retain the nutrients in the soil for use by the crops in the spring. So the outcome from these is to produce a mass balance of the inputs and outputs to the system, and also to observe, hopefully, in the shallow groundwater, some of the changes over time. And we're able to do that by putting in flow paths in our sites that show us older groundwater that's deeper and farther along in the system, and we can compare it then to the concentrations of nutrients in the younger water in the chemistry. These are our sites. One's up in Queen Anne's County and down in Sussex County. On the map, they look pretty similar. You know, they're bracketed by a couple streams. There's an irrigated field and a dryland field located adjacent to each other. We thought that might help reduce some variability. It turns out that there's still a lot of variability, even at that short distance. This field, the irrigation didn't start until partway into the project. This one's had irrigation for 7 or 8 years. And the big thing to note about this, and this is something that's probably the most important when we think about where we put BMPs aimed at reducing nitrogen in groundwater especially, which is nitrate, is the hydrologic system. Our southern site in Sussex County is a 90-foot thick surficial aquifer. Has a nice riparian buffer, but the stream has been channelized. You can see the little berm that disconnects the stream from the wetland. Our other site at Andover Branch is similar in length for the flow paths. This is showing the wells and the lysimeters and our irrigation wells. This one's irrigated in the surface. This one's irrigated in a 300-foot deep well. And it's a much narrower aquifer. It's only about 30 feet thick. It has a very steep drop-off. It's eroded down to this dark line, which is the confining bed. So here's a place where we have very different interaction in the riparian area between the two sites, as well as differences in the length of time it takes for water to get through the system. This stream actually has 9 to 12 milligrams per liter of nitrate at base flow, and this one has under 2. So there's a lot of differences, and that kind of makes you think about, well, what practice is most effective? Do I really need to improve the riparian zone here? Probably not. Would it be nice to reconnect the stream to the wetland here? It probably would help. Those are the types of things that understanding the hydrogeology can give you that you don't get without that. So if we look at Bucks Branch, which is the southern one, the age of the water ranges from, and we use sulfur hexafluoride and dissolved gases to determine this, from down here at about 5 years to over 35 years near the stream where the water's discharging upward. The wells range there from 0 to about 75 feet. And one way, you can't afford, it's very expensive to age date groundwater. And I just don't ever have enough money to do as many as I'd like to be able to. But we use silica, which increases pretty regularly with age as a surrogate for that, because silica dissolves from the minerals in the aquifer as the water moves through the system. So, I was just going to mention, this is actually old water at a shallow depth that's right near the stream where the water is discharging up. So you can't just look at depth. You have to think about the whole system. So here in Bucks Branch, water that's about 12 to 15 years old sits here. This is our irrigated field, the red line. The dryland field is the blue line. You can see the shallow groundwater nitrate concentrations range from 10 to 50 on the irrigated field. as opposed the water that's a little younger, as opposed to the dryland field where they cluster around 10. So right now we're just starting to look at this and see, is this because of irrigation or is it because of denitrification? Are there other factors that are involved? But it makes me think that probably in this case the shallow water is affected by irrigation. The concentrations of nitrate are affected by irrigation. And when you get to the deeper water, they're very similar. That site, this is the site we went across. We have wells in this cluster down from different depths along the edge of the berm. And we stuck this just a little stainless steel piezometer into the base of the stream and went across and collected samples. And this water, the deeper water, was 16 to 17 milligrams per liter of nitrate. And the red is the water coming into the stream ranged from about 15 to 17 also, and had a similar silica. So we were looking at older water coming into the stream here through the stream bed, and it had high dissolved oxygen. It didn't show great evidence of denitrification. So this is a place where we've had a lot of water transported to the stream without treatment, and that's a place we have to really think about how do we reduce the nitrate in groundwater so that over time that'll change. And a lot of Sussex County has that problem. So Bucks Branch is a very green stream, you can imagine. We're also doing a cover crop project right now, a little one with radishes and a mixed radish rye cover to see how those are impacting the nitrogen getting into the groundwater beneath the irrigated and the dryland field. I don't have any results for that yet. But we think that in this particular setting, and that's one of the radishes, they're really something. But BMPs that increase the nutrient use efficiency are really going to be important to reducing nitrate in groundwater, more so than the riparian zone processes. And the Andover branch, this is the natural, deeply incised stream channel. It has very high potential for denitrification. Even the water coming out of the bank that has higher nitrate has a long way to go across the stream bed before it gets to the stream. But, and this stream it's absolutely gorgeous. It has every animal you ever see anywhere and every wetland plant you ever see anywhere. It's undisturbed, it hasn't been channelized. It's a beautiful stream. It's totally natural. So here we're looking at ages though. This is age from, I just put well depth here for ease in comparison. The ages here, because it's very thin, are between 6 to 17 years. So it's about half the time it would take for the water to get through at Bucks Branch it takes to get through at Andover Branch. Dissolved oxygen goes from 10 to 5. It still has oxygen at the bottom. The funny thing here is we have two fields right next to each other. And this is before irrigation. The one that was the dryland field had much higher nitrate. It ranged from about 8 to 14 than the field that's currently irrigated. So we thought we were going in with a really easy comparison, and of course it's not. There's a lot more to figure out. So we're working on trying to determine why we have differences between the two, and also now that they're irrigating on this field, are we going to see any change? We get 2-3 good years of data collection to look at to see if we see any change after irrigation begins. The other thing interesting I wanted to just note, this is phosphorus. It's quite low, 0.0005 down here is about, and then at depth it increases. So what we think we're seeing here is we're not seeing phosphorus coming in through with the fertilizers. We're actually seeing phosphorus in the down dip part of our system near the outfall where it comes back out into the seep, being released from natural phosphorus in the sediments. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that we have natural sources of phosphorus as well as phosphorus from agriculture. In this area, it doesn't appear that we're getting much in at the soil surface, but we do see it somewhat deeper in the system, and that goes up to about 0.03. It's still pretty low. So we don't want to blame manure or phosphorus on manure everywhere if it's not, unless we know for sure that's the only source of it. I'll skip that one. The other thing we've done here is the nutrient uptake efficiencies for the corn crop. Like I said, we're working closely with the agronomists in the University of Delaware, University of Maryland, and cooperative extensions. And the irrigated field did have a higher 66% nutrient use efficiency for what was applied. Then the dryland field in 2014, we're going to have corn again this year. It's our last year. They had 50% nutrient use efficiency. That was a very good year for a dryland field. So we do see more nutrient uptake under irrigation. And that, I guess my question is, does irrigation move nitrogen faster through, though, if we keep the soils wetter? That's something we're trying to see also, to see if that makes a difference in what gets through. But main thing is nitrate comes from groundwater. If you're worried about high nitrate in streams, look to groundwater. Look to ways to reduce that. Changes related to management practices will take a long time to make it to streams, as a couple people have mentioned. And we do see some indications, other than what I showed you too, that there are some changes for the good as far as reductions in nitrate concentrations in shallow groundwater. We need to do a lot more work, I think, to verify that and see more data over time. Stream-based flow probably ranges, that recent modeling by Ward Sanford and others, 20 to 40 years in age.